Now, I've got those amazing scenes from Washington coming up in just a moment. But first up, let me show you how the government every year allows more than $1 billion of your tax dollars to be misspent. Yes, I'm going to have to talk to you again about the ABC. You won't believe their latest puerile antics, their latest deceptions and dishonesty at your expense. On Kenny on Media a couple of weeks ago, I criticised the ABC for ignoring this very important story about how a former High Court judge, former Federal Court judges, QCs and a total of 18 senior legal figures had written an open letter calling on the Victorian Parliament to amend or block draconian new laws that would give bureaucrats even more power over Victorians. Now, at the ABC's Media Watch, they could have investigated why the national broadcaster would ignore such a significant story. One that we showed was covered prominently by The Australian. It was covered on this station as well. It was covered on commercial radio. It was covered in The Age, The Financial Review, and so on. Yet the ABC had failed to cover it in their radio news and current affairs or in their television news and current affairs. But Paul Barry on Media Watch used your tax dollars last night to pretend the ABC did cover it.
Oh, it's a good story. A revolt against Dan Andrews' proposal to empower authorised citizens to detain fellow members of the public if they thought they posed a COVID risk. And after showing how well the rest of the media covered the story, Chris Kenny set about denouncing the ABC for avoiding it.
OK, so Barry admits it was a good story. Well, it was more than that, wasn't it? As you know, it was important. It forced a backlash, and it probably will save Victorians from having their civil rights trampled on like never before. But then Barry and Media Watch pretended we were wrong and the ABC had not failed.
But was it completely ignored? And was Chris Kenny right? No and no. On the day The Australian published its exclusive, ABC Radio Melbourne was leading its morning show with the story.
One of the signatories to that letter is Michael Borski, QC. Michael Borski, welcome to the program.
Well, well, well. At least 5 ABC radio networks, 3 television stations, myriad news and current affairs programs, podcasts and online news services and all the rest of it. And the ABC Media Watch team managed to find one interview with a passing reference to the letter. The interview itself is no longer available online. Doesn't that just prove my point? All those resources, Paul Barry and his staff of 10 at Media Watch, and that's all they found when it came to this crucial story. But it gets worse. They claim to have found more.
Borski's comments were briefly picked up by ABC Online. And on the same morning, RM Breakfast was giving the story national coverage, interviewing Victorian Upper House member Fiona Patton.
This is extraordinary, and it seems absolutely excessive, and I haven't seen any evidence that we need this expansion of powers.
But this is blatantly and demonstrably untrue. The online coverage Barry referred to just then, seen here, had a headline about the Premier defending his laws, and it mentioned Borski's criticism, but there was no mention at all of the 18 senior legal figures and their open letter, the very important story that the ABC, for some reason, was trying so hard to ignore. And that other radio interview that Barry cited with Fiona Patton on Radio National, it did not mention the open letter at all, didn't mention the former judges or the protests from senior legal figures in any shape or form. The interview was about the hotel quarantine inquiry, and Hamish McDonald, the host, just threw in this general question.
You're involved in a bit of back and forth about some omnibus legislation that the Premier wants to pass in Victoria. For those not in Victoria listening this morning, it includes a range of COVID-related measures. One measure, it does include rules to allow so-called authorised officers to detain people considered a COVID risk. The opposition won't support the laws. What's your position?
No mention of the story there, no mention of the former High Court judge, the former Federal Court judges, the 18 senior legal figures and the open letter. Patton went on to criticise the laws, but there was no question from McDonald about the open letter from these legal figures, no mention of it from him or from Patton. Extraordinary, isn't it? But Media Watch told you they'd covered it, and it was in that interview. Media Watch came up with one mention of the letter in one radio interview, and disgracefully, Paul Barry told Media Watch viewers it was mentioned in online news and another radio interview where there was not a single mention of it. In Paul Barry's desperation to silence my criticism and defend the ABC, he has misled the very people who pay his wage. Look, Paul, I know you're feeling the pressure, but it would have been smart just to admit we had a point and say that the ABC should cover important news, no matter the politics. Instead, we have the unedifying spectacle of a bloke paid more than $200,000 a year for 15 minutes of TV a week with his big team of 10 people or more. What, an operation of $2 or $3 million a year, the ABC won't say, and you use it to push personal vendettas and misinformation, and you get it wrong? I'm owed an apology, of course, and a correction from Barry and the ABC, but don't hold your breath because no one is in charge at the national broadcaster. But the bigger picture is this, especially on budget day. When they spend all that money on erroneous, petty and ideological frolics like this, how can they complain about their funding levels? This is what Paul Barry does to his colleagues at the ABC in the same week that they voted to take a pay rise immediately rather than share any pandemic pain with the people who fund them. He does stuff like this. He publishes and broadcasts erroneous information. Yep, that's because it's not your ABC, it's their ABC.